alaikum and welcome back to our course Electronic Circuit Design, that is EE332. So now we are going to start the post-mid course. I hope you have enjoyed your holidays and wish you good luck with the rest of your course. But before we can proceed to discuss the post-mid topics, we are going to have a brief review of what we have studied so far. So let's have a review what topics we discussed in the first 8 weeks of our course, that was the pre-midterm. So we started with BJT and FAT amplifiers frequency response, which is the chapter 9 of your textbook Electronic Devices and Circuit Theory by Robert Boylested and Louis Nashelski. So first we have discussed general frequency considerations, which included topics like the concept of decibels, the basic properties of the complex numbers which are useful in frequency analysis, and then we moved on to magnitude and phase Bode plots, and we discussed these issues particularly for first order systems. Then we proceeded to low frequency response of BJT amplifiers, and afterwards to low frequency response of FAT amplifiers. Before moving on to the high frequency response of these amplifiers, we discussed the issue of Miller effect capacitance, which arises due to the capacitance between the input and output nodes of an amplifier. And then we discussed the high frequency response of BJT amplifiers and that of FET amplifiers. This concludes our chapter 9. After that, we move on to the operational amplifiers and its applications and limitations. So this module covers the chapter 10 and chapter 11 of our textbook. Operational amplifiers, as we discussed earlier, are a special case of differential amplifiers. So in the beginning we discussed the basic concepts and terminologies related to the differential amplifier circuits. Then we revised or discussed the basics of op-amp, and by revised I mean that op-amps you have already studied in previous courses, at least their basic characteristics. Then we discussed various applications of op-amps, like summing amplifiers, subtractor, voltage follower circuits, integrator, differentiator, Schmitt trigger, comparator, and the instrumentation amplifiers, and finally the active filters. We also discussed the frequency limitations of these op-amps. We discussed the concept of slew rate, and we also discussed the non-idealities in op-amps like offset currents and offset voltages. After that we moved on to the power amplifiers, which is the chapter 12 of your textbook. So we started with series fed class amplifiers, and before that we discussed the basic difference between power amplifier circuits and ordinary small signal amplifier circuits. So after series fed class amplifier we discussed the transformer coupled class amplifier and then class B amplifiers. We discussed various issues like maximum power, voltage, currents, and efficiencies. So this concludes our pre-mid syllabus, and now we can move on to our today's lecture. So today's lecture consists of two portions. The first one is the harmonic distortion in power amplifiers, and the second one is the heat dissipation in power amplifier circuits and the reason for using heat sink in these circuits. So let's start with the harmonic distortion in power amplifiers. In the case of an ideal amplifier that you have studied so far, if you have a sinusoidal voltage as input, the output will be a sinusoidal voltage with a certain phase shift, which is usually either 0 degrees or 180 degrees. Now when it comes to real amplifiers, there we have non-linearities in the behavior of the transistors which make the major portion of these amplifier circuits. Now to these non-linearities, the output contains distortion. So when you have a sinusoidal input, the output is a distorted sinusoid. So now we need to quantify the level of this distortion. We need to have certain numbers by which we can get a good idea what is the level of the distortion in our output and whether the level of distortion is within the acceptable limits or not. So how do we do it? Let's proceed with the mathematical treatment of this problem. But first let's have a look at different waveforms related to this issue. Here on this slide you can see the output of an ideal amplifier, which is a pure sinusoid. You have omega t on the x-axis and V0 on the y-axis. You have omega t on the x-axis and V0 on the y-axis. Here you have a distorted waveform, and you can see that we no longer have a pure sinusoid. On the top of the graph you can see certain parameters which show the extent of the distortion in the signal. We will have the detailed discussion on these parameters as we proceed further. Here is another example with even higher level of distortion. So now the basic theory. If you have a time invariant system, then a periodic input will result in a periodic output, whether the system is linear or non-linear. In either case you will have a periodic output. Furthermore, the fundamental period of the output will be the same as the fundamental period of the input, or what we can say in frequency domain is that the fundamental frequency of the output will be the same as that of the input. So now the characteristic of a transistor and consequently the power amplifier circuit based on it changes only over a long time period, such that is months or years, whereas the input signal has time period in order of millisecond. So when we have a situation that we have a periodic input to a system and the period of the input is much smaller than the time scale over which the system property changes, we can consider that system to be a time invariant system. So in our case, we can consider our power amplifier circuit to be a time invariant system, and we can perform Fourier analysis on our output signal by assuming it to be a periodic function of time. Now once we have established that the output will be a periodic signal, we can proceed with Fourier analysis of this signal. So you know from your Fourier analysis that a periodic signal can be decomposed into a constant term which will be DC in the context of currents and voltages. Then you have the fundamental frequency component cos omega naught t and sin omega naught t with coefficients of A1 and B1 respectively. These two terms, A1 cos omega naught t plus B1 sin omega naught t, constitute the fundamental harmonic of the signal, or what we call the fundamental component. And furthermore, you have the higher frequency components with coefficients of An and Bn, and frequency is equal to n omega naught. So by doing the Fourier analysis, you can decompose your distorted signal into its DC component, its fundamental component, and the higher harmonics. So here is some mathematics. If you have a periodic voltage V, it can be written as V naught plus the cosine terms VAN cos 2 pi n f naught t and the sine terms VBN sine 2 pi n f naught t. V naught is not the output voltage. Here V naught refers to the DC voltage. So V naught is basically the A naught in your standard Fourier analysis. VAN are the ANs of your standard Fourier series, and VBN are BNs of your standard Fourier series. Furthermore, we can combine the cos and sine terms as shown in the second equation on this slide, where V will be equal to V naught plus sum of Vn's cos 2 pi n f naught t minus phi n, where phi n will be the phase of the nth harmonic component. So now we have rewritten our Fourier series in a compact form, that is V naught plus sum of Vn into cos of 2 pi n f naught t minus phi n over n, that is the summation is our variable n. So now the coefficient Vn is given by the equation Vn square is equal to Van square plus Vbn square, whereas phi n is given by tangent inverse of Vbn divided by Van. So now this gives us a compact way to write the Fourier series representation of our periodic signal. We can also use sine wave representation for our periodic voltage. So here V is equal to V naught plus sum of Vn sine 2 pi n f naught t plus phi n, where Vn square is equal to Van square plus Vbn square as before. So this equation remains unchanged. The phi n is now changed. It is tangent inverse Van divided by Vbn. And furthermore, you can also notice the change of sign before phi n. So for cosine wave representation, we had cos 2 pi n f naught t minus phi n. Here we have sine 2 pi n f naught t plus phi n. Now once we have done this analysis, we can define the level of distortion by certain parameters. The first set of parameters are the nth harmonic distortions, or dn's. So the nth harmonic distortion, which we represent by d subscript n, will be equal to magnitude of Vn by V1 into 100%. And then we have the total harmonic distortion, which is given by the square of all the harmonic distortions summed together and then taking the square root of the sum. So for example, d2% will be magnitude of V2 over V1 into 100%. d3% will be magnitude of V3 over V1 into 100%, and so on. So in this manner we can calculate the nth harmonics. In practical scenarios, only the first few harmonic components would be significant, and as you go to higher harmonics, their values will be so small that they can be ignored. So here you can see an example of distorted waveform, and we had a look at this waveform earlier in the lecture. So here we have sine wave representation of the waveform with d2 is equal to 10%, d3 is 4%, whereas phi 2 is 0 and phi 3 is equal to pi by 2 radians. So let's summarize our discussion. Output of a real amplifier has distortion due to non-linearity in the transistor. We can quantify this distortion by taking by doing the Fourier analysis. The relative amplitude of the higher harmonic then gives us the quantitative picture of the level of distortion in the amplifier output. Now let's start with the second part of our lecture, which is related to heat dissipation in power amplifiers and heat sinks for power amplifier transistors. The heat dissipation in power amplifiers is basically the heat dissipation in the transistors that are used in the power amplifiers. So in the low power circuits that you have studied so far, power dissipation is not an issue as the power levels are very low. But when it comes to power amplifiers, heat dissipation becomes a major problem because every transistor can operate only up to a certain temperature. So how we can study heat dissipation in power amplifiers and how we can calculate uh, the maximum power level that a transistor can handle without heating up to an unacceptable temperature. So we start with the basic theory, and that is the Newton law of cooling. And if you remember, you have already studied this law in your high school. So Newton law of cooling can be stated as the rate of heat flow between two regions is directly proportional to the temperature difference between the two regions and inversely proportional to the thermal resistance between these two regions. Now this is mathematically analogous to the Ohm's law, where the current is directly proportional to the voltage difference and inversely proportional to the resistance. So by comparing these two equations, we can construct a mathematical analogy as follows. So this is how our analogy looks like. The heat flow, which is represented by symbol Q, is analogous to current. Temperature is analogous to voltage, whereas theta, the thermal resistance, is analogous to electrical resistance. So let's consider the problem of heat dissipation in BJT transistors. And this analysis holds for FET power amplifiers as well. So the heat dissipation is occurring around the PN junction. In case of the BJT, this dissipation will be mainly at the base collector junction. The reason is that the power dissipation will be equal to the product of current and voltage across the junction. Now current is same through the base emitter and base collector junction approximately, but the base emitter voltage is only 0.6 to 0.7 volts, whereas the base to collector voltage is several times larger. So the heat dissipation will be mainly at the base collector junction. Now the heat has to flow from the base collector junction to the ambient environment. First, this heat will flow through the bulk material, that is the doped silicon material in the collector region, and the thermal resistance of this region we refer to as theta subscript Jc. After that, the heat has to pass through the casing of the transistor, which has thermal resistance theta subscript Cs. After that, the heat has to pass through the heat sink into the ambient environment, and the heat sink resistance is theta SA. Now, in absence of the heat sink, what will happen? That the heat has to flow directly from casing to the ambient environment. Now you know, in the case of resistance, that resistance is inversely proportional to the area of cross section. Now the contact area of the ambient air with the casing is quite small, which will result in a very high casing to ambient environment thermal resistance. So what we do, we employ a heat sink which is in direct contact with the casing. Now heat sink is constructed of materials which have very high thermal conductivity. Mostly it will be aluminum. So even though the area of cross section is very small at the casing heat sink interface, still the thermal resistance is very low because the thermal conductivity of the metal that is used in the heat sink is very good. Now at the heat sink air interface, what we have is that the heat sink on that side has a very large area compared to the area of the casing, which results in smaller value of thermal resistance. And after that, the heat simply flow into the ambient environment. So how we can mathematically model this problem? Before we proceed, so the total thermal resistance in analogy with electrical resistance will be equal to sum of all these resistances. So as we discussed earlier, the temperature is replaced by a voltage and heat flow by current. So mathematically this problem is now analogous to a current flow equal to Q, which is the heat dissipation from node TH to node TA. So as we know from electric circuit theory, that if we have a node H with voltage VH and we have a node A with voltage VA and the current is I, and so VH will be simply VA plus I RJA, where RJA is the resistance between node A and node H. So similarly, then TH will be equal to TA plus heat dissipation multiplied by the thermal resistance. Now this is a very interesting result. Let's see what information we can obtain from it. If we rearrange this equation, we get the heat flow equal to the difference between the junction temperature, which is TH. So please keep in mind, TH here is the PN junction temperature, or the base character junction temperature to be more specific, where TA is the ambient temperature and theta J is the total resistance between the junction and the ambient environment. Now if you want to ask the question, what is the maximum allowed heat dissipation? So other parameters are fixed. The only variable that we have is the TH maximum, because the ambient environment is not in our control, it is fixed already, and theta J is also fixed. So then Q max will be given by the maximum allowed junction temperature TH maximum minus TA divided by theta JA. So this implies that the maximum heat dissipation that you can allow depends on the thermal resistance between the junction and the ambient environment. To be more specific, it is inversely proportional to the thermal resistance between the junction and the ambient environment. Smaller this thermal resistance, higher power dissipation can be allowed, and higher allowed power dissipation translates into higher power handling capability for the transistor, as we discussed when we were discussing the issue of efficiency of the power amplifiers. uh, there we concluded that the maximum power that a transistor can handle is directly proportional to the maximum heat dissipation that is allowed in the transistor. And the second parameter that affects the maximum heat dissipation that is allowed, and consequently the maximum power handling capability of the power transistor, is the ambient temperature. So if the ambient temperature is becomes higher, the maximum allowed power that the at which the transistor can operate reduces. So that's why we have the heat sink to reduce the theta Ja. So now one final note on the relationship between the maximum power handling capability of a transistor and the maximum allowed heat dissipation. So we can write P naught in terms of Pn and eta, as you can see, and then we have the heat dissipation, which is equal to the difference between the input and output power as a function of efficiency and P naught. So after rearranging the equation, we can write P naught in terms of eta and Q. Now and finally we can obtain the expression for the maximum allowed power, which will correspond to the maximum allowed heat dissipation. So let's summarize our discussion on the amplifier heatsink. Every transistor has a maximum temperature limit given by Th. So the maximum allowed heat dissipation and consequently the maximum allowed output and input power are directly proportional to the difference between the maximum allowed junction temperature and the ambient environment. So the maximum allowed heat dissipation is inversely proportional to the thermal resistance of the region between the junction and the ambient environment. For example, for silicon, the maximum Th is between 150 to 200 degrees Celsius. For wider band gap material transistors, like if you have BJT transistor constructed of gallium arsenide, the maximum allowed Th will be higher. Whereas for germanium, which has narrower band gap, the maximum Th is lower, around 110 degrees Celsius or so. So one last point, you should use an adhesive or glue with good thermal conductivity for mounting the heat sink on the casing of the transistor. The reason is that the total thermal resistance between the PN junction and the ambient environment will be equal to the sum of all the thermal resistances. That is the sum of the thermal resistances of the regions that lie between the PN junction and the ambient environment. This is similar to the behavior of electrical resistance, where the sum of all the resistances in a series circuit give you the total resistance. So this is also a very important point. So now we conclude our lecture with an assessment question. So you have to plot the waveforms for the two cases that are given on this slide. So for each case you have been given the magnitude and phase of the harmonic component. So you have been given the percentage second harmonic distortion, percentage third harmonic distortion, percentage fourth harmonic distortion, and also the relative phase of second, third, and fourth harmonic component. So you have to draw the waveform for these two cases, and in each case you have to compare it with a pure sinusoid. You can use either a sine wave representation or a cosine wave representation, but you should clearly specify which representation you have used, and then you can send me the assignment by email. Thank you very much, and Huda Hafiz.